Saving America is taking on the national debt in a special mini-series. Welcome, this is Dr. David D. Shine for Saving America. And our first panelist says that the people vote with their wallet. Welcome back to Saving America with author Scott Paradis. So we're going to start with Scott Paradis, is author of 10 books, multiple personal and professional development programs. He is also retired colonel, having served 31 years in the U.S. Army. He was a congressional fellow with the United States Senate and a national security fellow at Harvard University. Welcome, Scott.
Okay, well, thank you, David. I appreciate all the panelists for being here, and thanks for having me. So when you came to me and thought about this national debt, the first thing I started to focus on was essentially money. Now, of course, there are a lot of social issues that we fight about politically and all of that, but people vote with their pocketbook. And so it's generally all about money. So what I wanted to do was just mention a few things about money. Of course, when we look at the national debt, we say, well, it's growing at an accelerating rate. There are typically 5 ways to deal with it, 5 traditional ways. One is deal with it as steady as she goes, which is kind of the Japanese model. Just keep piling on debt, and that's the route we're on right now. Then we have the much lauded, we're going to grow ourselves out of the debt. This is always the solution that politicians offer. We're going to grow ourselves out of the debt. Rarely happens. Of course, another option is to tax the population, and that's a self-defeating option. We have the default option, which brings up a whole can of worms. And then, of course, we have the inflate option. And that's the option that, along with the steady as she goes accumulating debt, we've chosen the inflate option. Now, when we think about inflating money, you got to understand what money ultimately is. It's a social contract based entirely on trust. Trust. And when you boil it down to its very most fundamental element, it's trust of people to people. We trust each other. And ultimately what that represents is people's time. You can say resources and time, but it's ultimately people's time. So anything to do with money is ultimately in control of people's time. So money represents power, control, and in our country, ownership. Now, it's a social contract. Rules change, and we can change the rules. Sometimes rules change intelligently and thoughtfully, mostly not intelligently and thoughtfully. Every time you change the rules, you put the trust at risk. And so we're now looking at this accumulating debt, this burgeoning debt, and we're putting trust more and more at risk, which risks a failure of the entire system. Now, remember, inflation is not the increasing value of goods and services. It's a declining value in the currency. The currency is collapsing, not goods and services are rising in value. They're still valued as people always have them. Now, so the government and the Fed are devaluing our currency as a way to slide around the debt. So on the face of it, it looks like it's everyone's feeling the same burden, but it really isn't. The insiders have advantaged the system. They write the rules, therefore they can write the rules to their benefit. So we must change the system. Now, I know your panelists are going to have some great ideas. I just had a couple of things to offer as considerations at a federal level, still within the traditional parameters, if you will. First of all, when you're in a hole, stop digging. Stop digging. So we've got to stop this accumulation of debt. So the first thing, with an eye on rebuilding trust, first thing I would do is suggest we educate both officials and the public on what money really is, how money is made, and how it is used and misused at the federal level. First thing. Now, honesty would be my policy. I know that's a novel feature in politics, but that is a requirement if we're going to move forward. So then we require 2 things, and these are both political, and that is instituting fiscal and monetary discipline. Fiscal meaning at the federal level, the federal budget, monetary discipline meaning primarily through the banking system and the Fed discipline. So stop the Fed from creating money and stop the federal government from overspending. I do that in 2 steps. That first one is educate, and the second one is balance the federal budget. Now, here's an idea for balancing the federal budget. First of all, it would take probably an amendment, constitutional convention, really the will of the people, and we've seen the people have no will to actually make a change. So we continue the way we're going. But if we did have the will to change, I would offer a 2-year budget cycle. Every Congress is 2 years. Now they're in the cycle. It's a pay-to-play system. They go through a 1-year budget. It used to be a systemic process. Now it's a reconciliation, throw everything at the end, have this big food fight. Nobody knows what's in any legislation. Sift that all out. 1 Congress, 1 budget, 2-year budget. Now, I didn't incentivize the members. If they do not pass a balanced budget, all members, House and Senate, are barred from federal office for 10 years, and they cannot work for any firm that has a lobbyist. So they could not be in the federal government, and they could not be in a firm that has lobbyists. So there's their incentive. Now, one other idea is when taxpayers file their taxes, they would allocate, this is where I want my tax money to go. If the Congress does not pass a balanced budget, the taxpayer allocations go into effect. So in other words, what I pick, want so much for defense or so much for education or so much for whatever I decide, that's where the money goes. So what I'm suggesting is we have to reestablish a system that builds trust, reestablish and maintains trust, and disempower the moneyed interests in favor of empowering the people. So there it is in a snapshot, if you will, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Scott. Inspiring words there. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Saving America. This is Dr. David D. Shine. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite platform.